And yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. Today we have a really good panel of folks to discuss applied AI in the real world of productionizing SLMs. I'm joined by Daniel Hunter, previous head of AI engineering at Harvey, Mo Asady, CTO of Convirza, Atin Sanyal, CTO and co-founder of Galileo, Abhishek, Patnia, senior staff ML engineer at Nubank. I believe Sudeep was unable to join us today, but yeah, I think we definitely have a great group of folks today to get started. So to kick things off, just a little bit of preamble. It's been an exciting couple of years for LLMs. Things really went mainstream in 2023, coming off the heels of ChatGPT. We had the release of Llama in that year. Everyone was building prototypes. I think this last year, 2024, definitely has been the year that the shift and focus has gone from experimentation to building production grade systems, getting them in front of customers, seeing what works. And it also seems like we're now on a trajectory of moving into more application level integrations. Even beyond that, kind of going away from the question answering into the let's actually take actions and affect the real world in some way. Abhishek, Mo, definitely I've chatted with both of you a lot over the past few months, learning about what your journey has been like for getting into production with these systems. Maybe Mo, if you could start us off and talk a little bit about what the road to production has looked like for you and for your organization.
Sure, Travis. I think we started by seeing this new movement as a threat. We've been in the industry for a very long time, and now it sounded like everyone could do what we're doing, which is a huge threat from a business perspective. But then as we started evaluating LLMs initially, and it's literally large language models, we quickly came to the conclusion that in order to achieve the desired results, we would have to increase the prompt size. And even with decreasing costs on the tokens, it is still a huge expense that we couldn't see our customers paying. So just from a cost perspective, it was a problem. Fine-tuning was not an option for large language models. So the only way to get them to do what we want them to do is really prompting. That's what got us into looking into small language models. We were very pessimistic in the beginning, and we're like, okay, let's set the bar really high for these guys. That's when you got involved, and see how it goes. So to our surprise, I mean, it was relatively easy to get them to a point where they outperformed the best prompt that we wrote for an LLM. We had an advantage of having existing data sets that we used to train our long form models. So it was literally just clicking the big red button and sitting there for 10 minutes and go, okay, let's try this out. And sure enough, it just worked. And that's really our story of success with Predibase.
That's awesome. I think one thing you mentioned there I thought was very interesting is that it started looking very early on like there was a lot of commoditization risk that was happening where everyone's building on the same foundation of OpenAI or what have you, and that building these more specialized models for your data was an opportunity to get more IP into these products. Abhishek, I'm curious, from your perspective, in your journey to production, did you see kind of similar risks and opportunities, or were there other motivating factors that were driving your adoption of
For us, it was slightly different, I would say, because so at Nubank, we are looking at AI as a customer experience enhancer. So on one side, you have things where people can ask questions about certain products that Nubank has, and on the other side, we are trying to short circuit steps that a customer has to take to achieve certain actions. So one big push right now is PIX transfers that we are using AI to do. So basically, instead of filling a form, somebody can just use the AI assistant and say, hey, transfer $20 Brazilian to somebody. And the way we are doing things at Nubank is we have integrated with bigger models like OpenAI as well as smaller models. So we first try to rapidly reach PMF, product market fit, around like, okay, this workflow works. It's working great for new bankers, and then we slowly start releasing it. And then we go into like our deep dive and say, okay, where is the latency, throughput, and cost SLAs that we need to improve? And we see, for example, for picks, we have like some internal SLAs where like, okay, this has to be done in these many seconds. And the cost of LLM needs to be less than the cost of the transaction itself, that we charge or whatever, right? So for us, like, models that were cheaper, which at the same time could have lower latency and higher throughput, was the start of our journey for looking at small language models. And lucky for us also is the fact that if you look at a production AI assistant, it has a lot of like small, narrow things that it has to do. And those things are prime candidate for fine-tuning a small language model, or even just using a small language model with prompting. So that has been our journey, essentially use the best proprietary model that's out there, get PMF, and then once you hit PMF, start optimizing the pipeline and plugging in smaller models as needed.
That makes sense. I think that journey is definitely one that I think makes a lot of sense, and that we've seen in a few other instances as well, where you start with something like OpenAI as a prototype, you then optimize and work your way to something more fit for purpose for you. I wanted to get your perspective on this as well from the evaluation side. So, I think one aspect of this that, can definitely be difficult is that, you get something working maybe with OpenAI, and then you slowly want to work your way to something more tailored to you. But along the way, how do you actually know that you're making improvements, or you're meeting the quality bars that you've set? Because certainly these proprietary models often set a very high bar on general ability to handle a lot of different scenarios. So when it comes to validation, oftentimes I think people get stuck in this vibes-based process where they don't have like really grounded metrics that they're using to make decisions on whether something is ready to go live into production. Galileo is a leader in LM evaluation. How should teams approach model evals? What are the best practice when oftentimes good feels like something very subjective?
Firstly, thanks for having me here. And secondly, you're absolutely right that the journey that most companies, at least the ones that we've observed through our customers and conversations, have taken is you kind of build like a loose prototype rather, and then it kind of works in your localized environment, and then you sort of push it cautiously to production. So a lot of 2024, we've seen people do that, but from an evaluation standpoint, one key gap or an issue that has been discovered is that the apps that you're building, the prototypes you're building kind of work a certain way in a controlled environment, but it's a whole different story when it meets the real world and real data. And there's a pretty strict discrepancy between the two. And so the need for evaluation and robust evaluation tooling has only been further sort of underlined and for a couple of reasons. One is, you want to have a way to quantify this kind of discrepancy and take action, but also in sort of this evolving toolscape where, things are changing all the time, agentic frameworks are coming in, and you want to make more data-driven decisions. So the need for this kind of tooling is super critical. As far as the way people have been doing evaluations, right from 2023 all the way to the end of this year, you're kind of right that people started off with total either wipe checks or old school metrics for erstwhile language models like Blue and Rouge scores, which simply don't work in the new era. And from there, there's been work. Most of 2023 was kind of the foundational work done on LLM as judge and sort of variants of that, because that started to show promise where you can ask another sort of similar sized or larger model whether the response or the generation was grounded or adherent, and that's kind of become a standard practice in most evaluation tools and platforms. But from our standpoint, we have this unique vantage point being at Galileo, being the evaluation tool, working with large enterprise, having seen these models being productionized, we've started seeing challenges around the scale of LLM as judge techniques. And that has kind of taken the evaluation journey to smaller models. Like we ourselves at Galileo have done very interesting innovation on how to use LLMs up to 1 billion or even below, like old school BERT style models, how you can use them to capture RAG hallucinations and those kind of similar metrics. And this change, the shift in using smaller models is primarily because, like to other folks' point here, the cost of intelligence has come down. And today, an 8 billion model can do pretty much the same thing that a 100+ billion model could do in 2023. So evaluation's taken sort of a similar journey as the application development itself, where it's more about using smaller models and then eventually fine-tuning them to your data so that those metrics and the way you're evaluating also evolves with your application.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I think one thing you touched on there, Daniel, that I wanted to get your thoughts on. So An mentioned that oftentimes it's not just one model, it's many models. I think that Harvey is a great example of a verticalized AI company that is working on Gen AI at scale, but for legal specifically, where oftentimes the users want to perform like more complicated workflows. They don't just want to ask a single question and get a single answer. Making a mistake in a highly regulated industry or an industry like legal where the stakes are really high, that can be really huge. When you reflect on like what are the barriers to put something in production in terms of building confidence in when so much of the business logic of these systems are powered by LLMs and not just one LLM, but like many LLMs working in tandem with one another, that can all be unpredictable, can all have the potential to hallucinate. How do you think about building confidence for your users in that world?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely something that, as you can imagine, we invested in very heavily at Harvey. Very proud of kind of the progress that we made there and the level of product that we've been able to ship. Yeah, I think there's actually a bunch of different ways to approach this, and maybe I'll kind of lay them out briefly. Focusing mostly on the evaluation side, I think something that we saw very early on and kind of directly referencing your comment of, hey, the larger, more complex workflows, something that we saw very early on was the importance of modularization. And how do you break these subcomponents down? How do you really figure out what the inputs and outputs should be of this API, and really treating a language model system as like a strict API? What types can you put on it? What guarantees can you create? Ideally, are you just doing simple classification? Are you doing some sort of comparison, or are you doing sort of free-form text generation or something even more complex? So I think investing really heavily in those evaluations and having really robust tooling to know, okay, when are we seeing a discrepancy between the data that we have in our evaluations versus what the users are using? What telemetry are you picking up there? Are you allowing the language model to even produce like an error signal that'll bubble up in your telemetry, and being able to see that in real time when users are doing things that you don't expect? And then, of course, for like sort of like free form generation, as we've seen, the classical NLP metrics, Rouge and others really don't work very well. And I think I remember just kind of quickly trying that out very early on at Harvey and immediately saying like, yep, this provides just really no signal. And we found that there's a few tricks that we did come up with, but mostly, especially for long form text generation, if you're really wanting to compare maybe a page of prose to another page, human evaluation is the gold standard, and that's very hard to beat. And I think obviously that's well seen in the industry, frankly. I mean, even Google with the search algorithm, if you talk to Google engineers and ask how they ship new versions of the search algorithm, it's, well, we have a bunch of metrics, and then also we have a bunch of people that just go in and run searches and tune it and make sure that it's actually up to par. And so I think really recovering and maintaining the human element in the process is important. And I think it's very beneficial to bring as many metrics as you can and modularize it. But at the end of the day, it's always important to make sure that you have a human in the loop at least doing a few sanity checks to make sure that things are going well. And I think then just to directly address your question around, hey, mistakes are very costly. You've got these complex workflows. Kind of going back to that, human in the loop, right? Treating your users as also like, hey, they are components in this system. They should be aware and have an understanding of what they are operating on, right? And so obviously your users are not necessarily going to be technical, and obviously with Harvey, they're not. But they still need to have an understanding of, hey, what are the confidence bounds on this? How do I check the work here? Are you providing your users with tooling to allow them when they're running in real time to be like, oh, okay, it's saying this, or it's producing this result. How do I dig into that result? Where's the citation there? What's the underlying document? Can I click out to some resource? I think there we found really good results, as well as just making it very clear from the get-go, right? Setting the expectation. This is a tool, like with any tool, you use it wrong, it'll do the wrong thing. Here's how you can use it to really accelerate and augment your workflows and get really good results. But at the end of the day, like there will be ways that this tool will not do the thing that you want it to do. And here's how you can kind of notice that. And here's what it's really built for. And I think as you see in industry broadly, as the workflows that we're operating on get even more and more complex, and we move from this sort of like trivial little RAG single language model call to these like very complex long running systems, having sort of human in the loop and performance indicators of progress and confidence just get more and more important, and being able to bubble up like, oh, we're running this workflow, there's this issue here, can you jump in, having some sort of orchestration panel, something like that. I see a hand raised though, so I'm going to pause there.
Yeah, Atin, did you want
Yeah,
to speak to?
just wanted to like 10-second augmenting what Daniel just said, like the importance of the human in the loop thing. One of the things from an eval's perspective at Galileo we've introduced in our platform is called continuous learning with human feedback, which is essentially like the workflow is that you author a baseline metric, which kind of loosely defines what you want to measure, and you give it a criteria. But that won't be one size fits all. And the way to evolve it with your not only changing data, but the system's compounding as well. New agents are coming in and RAG is evolving. So your system's compounding over time. The human feedback is sort of a critique of the false positives of the metric, which you automatically feed back into the system as a feedback loop, and your metrics kind of evolve with your system, with your data. And we've seen tremendous results. And all this is being powered by a smaller language model, which is fine-tunable. Just wanted to mention that.
Thank you.
I think this aspect of human feedback and human in the loop is very interesting. Daniel, you mentioned that you thought about human feedback both as an internal sanity check, but also as something that you look for from your production users. Do you incorporate that, or is that something you think about as like part of the development journey, is using that human feedback to do either fine tuning or other ways of using it to improve the models even today?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a crucial aspect, and it sounds like Galileo is also using that to great success. No, I think the way we thought about it at Harvey, and frankly, I think this, a very beneficial mindset is really just seeing it as kind of a gradual release process, right? This is pretty classic with software. Okay, you've got your internal users, you'll do some dog fooding, you'll check your human feedback there, like, hey, are all of our internal metrics nominal? Are the actual users themselves providing, via whatever system that you provide them in the app, are they providing, thumbs up, thumbs down? Are there any anomalies in the internals of the systems, and the language models are throwing errors themselves? Okay, now let's go to our sort of, maybe we have an external evaluation system, right? We're using Galileo, maybe we're using some other vendor or something like that. Okay, let's make sure that's working. Maybe we've got some friendly beta testers, we use those, see how that's working. And then of course, all of that data being saved and aggregated intelligently to some nice database or analytics platform to be able to show, okay, here's the anomalies, but also just here's all the raw data. So if we needed it, we can go in and say, okay, let's do some tuning, maybe either literally fine tuning a model, hopefully, or just tuning the prompts based on some issues that you're seeing. Seeing it as a gradual, and then constantly flagging data and saving it in the database. I see another hand, so I'll pause.
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah, not meaning to interrupt at all. Just wanted to chime in on the same topic. Different use case for us, right? We're evaluating the performance of agents, and as a result, we're providing scores based on the agent's performance. But what we've noticed, as typically monetary compensation is tied to the agent's performance, they're more inclined to provide feedback when they're not scored correctly. So we're using that data as a loop back to the model to improve the performance over time. And this has been a very interesting use case.
That's awesome. Yeah, one additional question I wanted to pose to you, Mo, was related to something that Daniel mentioned about breaking down monolithic problems into smaller problems. I think that oftentimes people start with like this single model, single question answer that tries to do everything. I know in working with you, you've thought a lot about ways to break down the problems into like very small, like individual, tasks or classifications, et cetera. Yeah, could you speak a little bit to how you think about when is the right time to fine tune it? What granularity should we be fine tuning models to kind of perform these specific tasks? And what use cases have you found it makes the most sense for?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. So as we were looking into this, our use cases, we're taking a unstructured data format, which is a human conversation at scale, and we're trying to make sense of it. We're talking millions of phone calls in this case. So what we've done is taking, let's say, 5 or 10 high-level questions, broken them down to smaller yes, no, scale of 1 to 10 kind of questions, and then that's the perfect use case for a small language model. Like it has one purpose in life, it's an adapter, and all it returns, all it knows and all it returns is that one question, and it answers it with very high accuracy. So then we're combining the result from these models and putting them in a structured way that both humans and machines can consume. So we could work with them and present them on dashboards, and they act as the foundation for different types of reports. What we're experimenting with today is taking that data and then feeding it to a large language model to then produce sort of an unstructured data format in the form of documents where it can be creative, it can see what its little brothers or sisters did, and use that as the foundation for an unstructured document that could then help executives make this and managers make decisions about coaching, revenue, what correlations it's finding between revenue and these different data points, and what kind of action they could take internally to then optimize revenue and just translate some more cash in the drawer.
That's very interesting. Let's see, Abhishek, wanted to definitely get you into the conversation again as well. So I think that, related to this about, when to fine tune, et cetera, there's also often this conflation between open source and small models, and also the split between open source versus proprietary models. I'm curious, like, as you see a lot of the current trends in the industry that are happening around agents on one side, but then also I think there's a big moment for test time compute with reasoning systems like O1 that are becoming more popular. How do you think about the trends when you're planning out like where you want to make investments at your organization of investing more in proprietary models versus open source? Do you think that the trend naturally continues towards open source? Do you think that there's always going to be a place for both? Or, do you think that like these new types of modalities like, reasoning and test time compute create a more natural division between when to use one versus the other? Like, what's your thought on open versus proprietary?
Yeah, so I mean, to answer that, first I'll like circle back to what Daniel was saying. So any industrial strength system these days, it is modular. So even our systems are very modular, and we break them into narrow, small modules. And each of them could be heuristics or large language models, or small language models for that matter. And then we have like a lot of telemetry to understand exactly what each module is doing. We have an internal labeling team, which is labeling the data for these narrow use cases. So the point is that we get like a lot of understanding, and then we also have customer satisfaction surveys to understand like how the end product is doing. So the point is that we get like a lot of data across the board on each single module of the pipeline on how it's doing. And so for us, the difference is not if it's a small model or a big model, if it's a proprietary model or if it's an open source model. The dimensions that we look at is quality, throughput, latency, cost. These are the 4 things. So depending on what a module is doing, we start looking at everything. Like, so for example, we'll start with, and we also follow, we are very, very careful about technical debt. So what we would do is, so for example, if there's a module, we're like, okay, this module is doing pretty well, but it's using, say, OpenAI 4.0. And right now we want definitely to cut the cost while maintaining throughput and cut the latency. So we're going to start looking at everything from like GPT mini to non-fine-tuned open source model, fine-tuned open source model, combine that with what the inference engine do we have. So for example, the reason we like Predibase is because you guys are on top of implementing all the newer inference optimizations, and we would do those experiments and then figure out what we want. So to answer your question, like I personally do not really care about those trends. I just try to be aware of like what different models are doing and then pick the one that works best for the module that we're trying to improve. So that's how I see it. And also, and I do think that the image that, you know, open source models are small and proprietary models are big, I think that's going away slowly. We have like open source models which are like 450 billion parameters now. And also on the performance side, a lot of the smaller models are doing much better than the larger models on certain dimensions. So so that's how we look at it, and I look at it. So it's more like I'm hoping that other product owners are doing the same thing, where like the trends that they are going after is measure the shit out of your pipelines and optimize using first principles. We're like, okay, we want to cut latency and increase throughput. This is a cost envelope. What's the best we can do in the technical debt budget that we have?
Makes sense. So in a large way, just using whatever the right tool is for the job based on those criteria they laid out.
If then else, I'll use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like a big, motivation there is then, or a big, requirement is having good tooling that lets you be able to know, how these different solutions compare for your use case.
So at Nubank, we got a little bit, at least I got a little bit lucky in the sense that Nubank has like a very big old history of using machine learning for credit worthiness, because credit cards is their business. So they have a lot of tech around telemetry and metrics on machine learning itself. And that has been ported over to LLMs also. So we don't have ad hoc LLM. There's a central team, some of those people you have already met, and everything goes through proxies. And so we have like very, very detailed metrics on each and every step of our workflows.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Atin, getting your thoughts on this, what role do you see like open source and fine-tuned models playing, particularly in the space of model evaluation? You of course have, the Luna models, which are state-of-the-art on a number of different evaluation benchmarks and are also, very like efficient in terms of size and latency. Do you see fine-tuning and for both for your customers as well as for how you thought about developing the Luna project as this is something we do once we've exhausted all other avenues like prompting, RAG, et cetera? Or do you think that this is something that, you and your customers should be thinking more about or are thinking more about, earlier in the AI life cycle as well?
Yeah, so for context, I think Luna is sort of a suite of models, much smaller models that we built internally for evaluations. So I think, yeah, like Abhishek said, right, the story is very similar on the evaluations front, where there's no one size fits all. And even the future is not like, oh, this will be the only way people evaluate versus that. It comes down to the nuances of the use case often. For example, there's the triad of cost, latency, and accuracy that's always a challenge to solve. Of course, throughput is kind of the driver of these three. But even on the eval side, we've seen that there's been this challenge of high accuracy evals come at the penalty of high cost and a high throughput often, especially if you're using some sort of a generative model behind the scenes in the loop. Just as an anecdote, one of our customers, they were having a throughput of roughly 10 million queries a day, and within a span of 8 months, their eval budgets went, or not budgets, but eval costs went through the roof, over 7 figures, just because there was an LLM as a judge in the loop. So, one additive LLM call for each LLM call you make is a very high penalty that you have to pay, which is why we kind of went down the spectrum of trying to use very cheap models that can run on commodity GPUs, honestly, kind of went completely on the other side of the spectrum, where the first version of Luna was essentially a 500 million parameter DBERTA model. And we reduced RAG hallucinations as an entailment problem. And we were able to do some pretty awesome feature engineering and stuff to be able to give high accuracy hallucination scores using such a small model. But more recently, we've explored some other avenues as well, where there's a ceiling that you hit for every method that you use. If you use like straight up LLM as judge with extremely big prompts, you start running into the context token issues that we've already spoken about, extremely expensive. So there's a ceiling you hit on cost that you don't want to exceed. On the flip side, you get extremely high latencies, like very low latencies rather, for very smaller models, which can be pivotal for like high importance chatbot or agentic use cases, similar to the ones at Nubank, right? Where you're doing transactions. So you want low latency for that, but you can't sacrifice accuracy. So there's the whole triad. And from an eval standpoint, where we've landed more recently is some of these sort of low mid-sized models in the 2 billion to 8 billion range. If you combine a couple of things, including not relying on chain of thought all the time, because chain of thought is great at reasoning things, but often we've seen that many industry use cases don't need that level of super deep reasoning. Like, yeah, of course, math like problems do need that, but you can get away with a lot by not doing chain of thought. There's a second version of Luna that we've published, which talks about how you can essentially output single token probabilities from these models in the 2 to 8 billion range. And you can get extremely high accuracy comparable to chain of thought for many of the RAG use cases that we've benchmarked on. But here, fine-tuning becomes important because a lot of these models are open source, they're hosted in custom inference solutions, but they give you often what these LLM APIs don't, which is probability scores, token level probabilities, and you can do a lot with that when it comes to detecting or quantifying these hallucinations is one example, but there's many kinds of eval. So I'll stop there. But this is kind of the landscape or the path, the journey that we've had in LLM evals.
Abhishek, you want to comment on that?
Yeah. Just wanted to echo what Atin was saying. Like, it's very interesting where like a lot of the stuff, like chain of thought and all of those things, once you start making your things modular, you can get away without doing that. Where what these SLMs or large LLMs give you is the flexibility of tweaking your pipeline very, very quickly. So what we have seen is few shot prompting techniques, especially now that prompt caching has become like so common in the industry, works really, really well. So yeah. So there's like a lot of stuff in production use cases, which is like very, very simple, and you don't need COT and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that personally really excites me, kind of being in the infrastructure side of this, is thinking about this trade-off that you describe of like quality, latency, costs, and thinking about like where you want to make those trade-offs and at what point in the life cycle. So, for example, I think there's a lot of interest that we're seeing in this idea of, being able to take like a very complex multi-step chain of thought, reasoning flow, compute that once, and then distill it into like a smaller model that can do the task equally well, but like at a much lower cost at inference time, right? So I think that they're thinking about this trade-off is like not just like the trade-off existing in one sense, but also like where you pay that trade-off, if it's like for doing fine-tuning or for doing it at inference time.
Yeah, 100%. And the cool thing is that like we still do not understand so much about the mechanics of how these LLMs do what they do. There's like a lot that can be achieved. So for example, for distillation stuff that you're talking about, like I'm pretty sure if you take those COT completions and use techniques from knowledge distillation where you are matching logic probabilities across all the layers, you will actually start getting like really good small models which are like replicating that same functional mapping. So yeah, there's like I think there's a lot of stuff around that that's going to come up in the next 1 year, which will be like, wow, it's amazing.
And Daniel, I'm curious from your perspective as well. Do you see it the same way as this, fundamental trade-off between these three things, and it's just a matter of like whichever model ends up being the best for the job, or is there another way that you think about assessing what type of model is the right fit for the job?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of nuance that we could delve into here, no pun intended. But at the end of the day, all I really care about as an operator and a builder, and maybe someone who's shipping out this software is, hey, how much am I paying for this? How long does it take for the tokens to come back, and how accurate are they? And I probably care about accuracy number one for any given context, and then speed and cost after that. And I would say that it's been very exciting to see the resurgence and then the growth that we're seeing on the small language model side, the improvement in fine-tuning and evaluation infrastructure. I think that the recent Llama releases, for example, 3.3, much smaller model that you can now run kind of locally on a new MacBook, shows just extremely high intelligence. And I think that as that trend just continues, and especially with sort of like trading off for inference time compute, right? Okay, how much can I, inject chain of thought into the system? And that's just going to change the product landscape even more significantly and mean that compute at the edge or close to the edge, and offloading that maybe to the user potentially or some nearby data center, as well as just allowing people to run much higher amounts of high intelligence compute for very low cost and very low time, will unlock just fundamentally new products. I mean, I can tell you, obviously at Harvey, there were so many different product lines that we were excited about that would be unlocked. It'd be like, oh yeah, everything was like 10x faster, everything's 10x cheaper. It's like, oh wow, a whole new class of products unlocks. So I think when it comes to model selection, the landscape changes every day. I mean, it feels like every day I get an email in my inbox of, Amazon released their new suite of models. OpenAI has all the releases right now, Llama, etc. So the list just goes on, and it's exciting to see the proliferation and the explosion of improved infrastructure in the space.
Awesome. So we're coming close to time. Maybe we can really quickly wrap up by just everyone giving their quick spicy take on the current and future state of Gen AI. Maybe one thing you're most excited about, or what's your hot take on where things are going? Maybe Mo, go ahead and start with you.
I'm going to echo what the guys said on the panel before, that the delta, to our surprise, between small language models and large language models is not as big as everyone thinks. These little guys are way smarter than you think, if you haven't experimented with them. And that training small language models will be the main method versus prompt engineering?
Yeah, I think in particular with Llama 3.3, 70 billion just coming out, it's like the quality ceiling just keeps going up. Abhishek, what about for you?
Yeah, so I think like we will start seeing a revolution in so I think the stuff that we have seen so far has really changed a lot of the B2B things. I think we'll start seeing a lot of crazy stuff in B2C because of small language models. So we are reaching a point where you can run really intelligent small models on your laptops or a Mac Mini. Um, and also you can fine tune them locally. So there are like a lot of use cases that are going to start opening, ranging from like companies where they have to have an air gapped LLM running on a laptop because only that employee has access to that document and nobody else. So think Deloitte and their consultants working on like highly secure projects. To things like I'll have an air gapped model that's just sitting in my house, running on maybe 2 Mac Minis, and learning everything from me, but never leaking it out to the world. To video games having really much more intelligent NPCs and stuff like that. So I think like a lot of that is coming in the next 1 to 2 years because it's very crazy what we are seeing. On one side, commodity inference and training is getting unlocked, and on the other side, we are seeing that if you just give high quality data to a small model, it starts performing as good as a big model. And the confluence of those two things would be like very interesting to see. And I think like these AIs will just invade everything around us. Like think LLMs as IoT, more or less, like one running in your fridge, one running on your laptop, and they're all talking to each other in a secure manner. Like, to me, like that would come pretty soon.
Yeah, I think and in particular this idea of like the latent potential and unlocking more from individual data sources. I think there's still so much to be done there. Atin, what about your hot take for the future?
I don't know if I have a spicy take that's funny enough for the audience, but I will say that I'm very excited about, I think, innovations happening on all fronts or progress being made on all fronts. You know, at the highest level, there's the OpenAIs and Anthropics. Certainly, the ceiling will be pushed further for the largest models. I don't think people realize the potential of models like O1, which have baked in reasoning that's not been realized at the ground level yet. So we'll start seeing some of that happen. But also, you know, at the lower levels where some of these smaller models are getting better and better, the cost of intelligence has come down. I'm excited to see the proliferation of the software engineering around these models. If you remember, Travis, in the days of Michelangelo, we had this famous poster where there was the ML code in the middle and there was the entire infrastructure around it. It's pretty true here, except that the infrastructure is, you know, sort of the tech stack is evolving and maturing. So I'm excited to see, you know, all the infra around these LLMs and what you can do, how you can orchestrate them better, you can run them at scale. So all this will lead to sort of grounds up practical applications better. And then there's multimodality and agents will also see light of day. So there's so much to be excited about for the next, for 2025.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think it seems like these days the line between what's a model and what's just like, you know, this massive infrastructure in the back end is like being blurred. Like you go to Perplexity, you use ChatGPT, it's like, you know, it's not just one API call anymore, right? There's so much more happening. And Daniel, what about you? What's your prediction for the future or hot take?
Yeah, absolutely. Also, just want to say huge shout out to everyone who made this happen. Thank you so much. Had a great time on this panel today. Probably hot take and prediction for the future for me. Kind of echoing some of the previous conversation here around you know, reasoning and kind of inference time compute. I think there's a really exciting intersection of products that can be built when you have these sort of like small models, easily fine-tunable, easily sort of parameterized by the inference time compute. There's a lot of tasks where you know, time is not so critical. Okay, we're not dealing with maybe a real-time user interaction, but we're doing some like real serious data processing that maybe needs to be air gapped. Maybe we're very cost sensitive, but hey, yeah, run all night and do some batch job. But then you can just dial up that reasoning level compute and really get the right answer. And that's what the user's going to end up caring about. So I think there's enough axes kind of emerging on the playing field that I think 2025 is going to be a really exciting time for product development.
Yeah, I love that one. It's definitely one that I've been thinking about a lot as well recently, is, this idea of, thinking of these AI agents as being almost like your the people who work for you in an organization, like just assign a task, let them go off and do it, not thinking about it on the order of seconds, but maybe days, right? Definitely lots of exciting things. Well, we're definitely at time now. So thank you everyone so much for your time, both the audience as well as our great panelists. And yeah, enjoy the rest of SmallCon, everyone.